What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and if you're enjoying the content here on my channel, then make sure you hit the like button and make sure you hit subscribe so you can help decide what direction the content on my channel goes in the foreseeable future. Okay, so recording audio with a head cold is like one of the toughest things to do because my mind is all over the place. What we do here is we essentially pick up with all these superheroes fighting each other. Now, the craziest thing about all this is that this is really just heroes fighting each other for a little while. I mean, there's really not a whole lot to it. It's pretty straightforward, but the other half of this and what Bendis focuses on is that Ulysses' powers are evolving and his powers are growing. That it's not just having visions anymore, that it's about his powers and his visions becoming a little more complex and in some ways a little darker. The other half of this is that Ulysses' visions are also getting to the point where he's able to discern them a little bit better and differentiate between those visions that are more likely to happen and those visions that are least likely to happen. The issue with this, though, is that as he goes through and he begins to witness this fight between all these different superheroes of Carol Danvers' team, of Iron Man's team, the Guardians of the Galaxy, the Extraordinary X-Men, the all-new, all different Avengers, so on and so forth, what he does is he has another vision where he essentially shows everybody the idea of Miles Morales killing Steve Rogers. And so because of this, it's really Carol Danvers kind of panicking and actually moving towards the idea of arresting Miles Morales. Now, this is the point at which everybody turns against her because she's talking about arresting a kid. It's one thing if it's an adult. It's one thing if it is somebody who was more likely to commit a crime. But Miles Morales has done nothing but fight the good fight. He's done nothing but be a superhero. He's not like Hawkeye, right? I mean, Hawkeye was a bad guy before he was a good guy. And even then, he wasn't really like a bad guy per se. He was just kind of a victim of circumstance. He was more or less duped into being a villain when he first showed up. He basically rectified his errors and then became part of the Avengers. But with the rest of these superheroes looking around and seeing that Carol Danvers is talking about the idea of arresting a child for a crime that he hasn't committed yet, Tony Stark kind of loses it and says, look, you're talking about a kid. You're talking about arresting a kid and treating them like they're an adult. Now, in truth, the only person who really should have anything to say here is Captain America because he's the one that Miles Morales supposedly killed at some point in the future. And so, of course, Steve Rogers steps up. Now, remember, I can't keep harping this enough because I feel like it's something easy to forget. This is Hydra Captain America. And so while he puts on this show of, hey, look, like, let's be reasonable here, let's calm down. We have to make sure we're doing the right thing. This is all a show. This is all him acting the way he is for the purpose of creating a rift in the superhero and the Avengers community. And the way this comes about is when he basically says, hey, look, there may come a point where Miles Morales might kill me, but he hasn't done it yet. And until he does it, you guys don't need to do anything. In a lot of ways, because of the fact that he's so respected, Captain America's word is law. I mean, that's just the way it is. When Captain America says, we're going to do things a certain way, people are like, okay, let's go do it. Now, Carol Danvers doesn't want to listen to this. Carol Danvers is like, no. You can't just let him go like that. And Captain America's like, yes, I can. And he's going home. Thor, take him home. And Jane Foster, basically leaves and Carol Danvers still wants to arrest him. And so because of that, because of all this, because she's basically turned to this point where nobody really seems to recognize her or I guess everybody's starting to see her for what she is. And somebody who's so dangerous, somebody who's willing to go to whatever lengths in order to make sure that her agenda is maintained. Basically, everybody begins turning against her. Of course, Tony Stark was already against her, but now Captain America's turning against her. S.H.I.E.L.D. is willing to arrest her. T'Challa, Black Panther, he essentially sits down and says, I will follow Captain America to the ends of the earth. Captain America is a man that I look up to. He's a man that I idolize. Even if I don't necessarily agree with everything that he does, I do recognize that the side that Captain America is on is always the right side. And so he says, look, I've been around this long enough. I've watched you screw up long enough. I've watched you make mistakes long enough. I'm not doing that anymore. I'm siding with Captain America. This kid's gonna go and I'm out of here. I'm no longer in your corner anymore. Not only that, Iron Man's team takes off. The Inhumans basically abandon Carol Danvers, and so it's really just her. Now, at this point, this is when we start to get into Ulysses' powers beginning to grow and beginning to expand because the Inhumans sit down and try to talk to him. The Inhumans are like, look, we need to talk to you right now, but he's wildly immersed in everything that's going on. In addition to this, all the other members of the superhero community are trying to figure out what to do next. Now, this is really just Marvel kind of setting the stage, right? I mean, this is Bendis saying, hey, look, guys, after Civil War II is over, we basically get into Marvel Now 2.0. That's how things were supposed to happen. This was really kind of like the Secret Wars fiasco all over again, in the sense that Secret Wars was supposed to finish, and then we were supposed to just segue right into all new, all different Marvel. But because of all the delays, the all new, all different Marvel titles started coming out before Secret Wars ended. That's basically what's happening here, with regards to Civil War II, in the sense that because of all the delays, Civil War II basically ended before the Marvel Now 2.0 titles came out. So for those of you guys who were getting into like Ultimate Squared, or those of you guys who were reading Unworthy Thor, different things like that, or who were reading, the new Iron Iron Man with Riri Williams, a lot of these things were supposed to come out after this was finished. And so this should provide some clarity in terms of where these characters are coming from. Something else to note here though, is that Riri Williams is still a part of what's going on with regards to these all new, all different Avengers. She's kind of a weird situation. She's kind of a mixed bag here in the sense that she was really figuring out, what it is that she was capable of doing with regards to her makeshift Iron Man suit while this whole Civil War II event was going on. That was one of the major tie-ins of her character with regards to the backup features and the Invincible Iron Man line of stories under Brian Michael Bendis. But something else that I want to point your direction to is Carol Danvers herself. This is why I say that Brian Michael Bendis is so good at developing characters, because again, if you have this very visceral reaction to Carol Danvers in the sense that you hate her in the story so far, then Brian Michael Bendis has done his job. And that's really the mark of a good writer. Because if you were kind of going through this and you were like, whatever, Carol Danvers, I don't care, then the story didn't really resonate with you. But if you were anything like me, you hated Carol Danvers. You were mad as hell with Carol Danvers. And so Bendis was basically doing his job correctly. Not only that, he shows us that she is remorseful. In her mind's eye, she sees the face of James Rhodes in his final moments. In her mind's eye, she sees Bruce Banner dead. And in her mind, it's all because of her. It's all because she basically started all this. Now, she would never admit that publicly. And in fact, she refuses to. When we have Storm and the Extraordinary X-Men along with, Jean Grey and a handful of others to show up, she never comes out and says, look, I'm the reason why all this is going on. But a lot of it's because of the fact that there's no time to, because things are basically moving a mile a minute. Where Steve Rogers had told Thor, get Miles Morales out of here, and then Miles Morales had Thor drop him off before he got to his home, he ends up taking off and showing up on the Capitol steps in Washington, D.C., which of course is where Ulysses had the vision of him killing Captain America. And so this is again, Carol Danvers acting in a reactive way. Now from here, we jump back to Ulysses, and this is actually where the story gets kind of cool, because now we get Andrea Sorrentino's art being mingled in with the art of David Marquez. Now, at least I think it's David Marquez. With this bit of storytelling here, this is basically Ulysses kind of leaving this plane of existence, so to speak, and actually traversing and meeting Old Man Logan. Now, the first person he encounters is a member of the Hulk's family, but of course, Old Man Logan kills him. But Bendis doesn't really give us like an explanation of exactly when this takes place. All we know is that this seems to be in the Old Man Logan universe or universe that is similar to it. But keep in mind, when it comes to those realities, when it comes to the stories, the future of the Old Man Logan universe, when it comes to Days of Future Past, those are all alternate realities. At some point along Marvel's timeline, that was the future. At some point along Marvel's timeline, Days of Future Past was the future until it was stopped, and then it became an alternate reality. At some point along the line, Old Man Logan was the future until it was stopped, and then it became an alternate reality. That's how that works. And so what Ulysses really seems to be doing is jumping into these different realities, all of which were at one point the future of the main Marvel universe. And so because of this, when he's talking to Old Man Logan, this is basically the future of the Marvel Prime, the main Marvel universe, if the conflict between Tony Stark and Carol Danvers keeps on going in this direction. The problem with this is that he doesn't really get a whole lot of answers here. While he's talking to Old Man Logan, he's like, what led to all this? Where are we? What's going on here? Old Man Logan says, well, it was Tony Stark that happened. Tony Stark pushed her too far. He doesn't say who it was, and even when Ulysses asks, who is it that you keep referring to when you say he pushed her too far? Logan doesn't respond. He doesn't answer. Instead, Ulysses just kind of yanked back to the present day, and he's essentially just kind of talking to the Inhuman. So things are left a little ambiguous here. Not only that, we of course have Steve Rogers heading up to meet with Miles Morales. Now, this was also covered in the Nick Spencer Captain America Steve Rogers story, when he was basically acknowledging the possibility that going out and seeing Miles Morales here could possibly result in his death. But because of the fact that Steve Rogers is a Hydra agent, his goal was to bring down the superhero community and orchestrate the fall of superheroes in and of themselves, allowing Hydra to basically take its place. The problem with this is that in the midst of all this exposition between Carol Danvers and Miles Morales and Steve Rogers, we suddenly have Tony Stark making his appearance with his War Machine armor, or at least some more advanced iteration of his armor. The problem with this is that while Carol Danvers and Tony Stark are fighting one another, the indication here seems to be that Carol Danvers basically kills Tony Stark. Now, that's not necessarily the case in the sense that she does blast his armor, but the reason why Carol Danvers is able to do this is because, remember, she's still binary. Now, this is something that a lot of people don't know about when it comes to Carol Danvers, and I want to touch on this for a second. So way back in the day when she first showed up, she was just a woman who was part of the Air Force. There was nothing special about her, but she was enamored with Mar-Vell of the Kree, who operated as Captain Mar-Vell. Because of this, there came a point where she was basically exposed to the Psych Magnetron, and her desire to be the equivalent of Captain Mar-Vell resulted in her developing the powers that she had, and so she went forward as Miss Marvel. So that was really kind of the crux of her. That happened for quite some time, but Marvel really lost the ability to do anything special with her because they couldn't find any compelling stories. Now, eventually she was rolled over to the X-Men under Chris Claremont, and he basically made her this person that had the ability to absorb all different kinds of energy and then use those energy for her own ends, energy projection, enhanced strength, so on and so forth. And so she wasn't really a mutant per se, so much as somebody who just had these cosmic level powers to a degree. And so because of that, following the whole era of her being being binary under Chris Claremont as part of the X-Men franchise, eventually she was rolled back over and the binary element of her character was rarely ever seen, but it was something that still existed. And that's why if you go through and you look at Carol Danvers in like the 1990s going into the early 2000s and even up to the present day, every once in a while you would see her use energy blast because that's something she's capable of doing. She doesn't use it very often, but she does from time to time. Now, having said that and focusing again back on Ulysses, his continued experiences are really just tied directly into watching all these events unfold. And again, these possible futures. The problem with this is that as Carol Danvers and Tony Stark continue to fight one another, Ulysses' visions eventually lead him to the ethereal plane, to beyond the realm of normal existence. Not only that, he basically grabs the mind of Carol Danvers, Nova, Miles Morales, all these different heroes, and basically says, here are all the futures that I see. Here are all the things that could happen. You know, there's futures where monsters run everything. There's futures where the X-Men have taken over the world. There are futures where Steve Rogers was killed by Miles Morales. There are all these different futures out there. Days of Future Past. Ultron takes over everything. There's all these different realities that exist, and then suddenly he moves beyond this normal plane of existence and he encounters eternity. Now, something I want to clarify here, because a lot of people have been asking this question about Marvel when it came to the idea of eternity being chained. In the Ultimates line of stories, eternity is in chains. In this story, he's not in chains. There's a reason for that. In Ultimates Squared, I think it was, Galactus actually revealed that the eternity that's in chains is the multiversal eternity. And that was something that had never really been explored before. It had to a degree mentioned maybe like once or twice, but it was nothing Marvel actually went with. Instead, all they ever said was, well, every universe has its own version of eternity. What Ultimate Squared revealed is that there is a multiversal eternity. There's one eternity that represents the multiverse. You know, one eternity that represents all the different universes in the multiverse. That eternity is chained, but all the other eternities from within each universe, which are like these child units, so to speak, they're still able to operate accordingly. So again, it's kind of a weird situation with regards to Marvel in terms of what they're doing with their cosmic entities. It's a classic example of the left hand not knowing what the right hand's doing, and it's one of the reasons why, despite it being all new and all different, continuity errors still reign supreme. But the fact remains here that in this climactic battle, which does kind of feel a bit rushed, we basically have Tony Stark who's kind of left unconscious, and while he's not necessarily dead, he seems to be in this weird kind of catatonic state. Now, Bendis gives almost no explanation as to why this is. All he really has Beast say is that, well, Tony Stark's been experimenting on himself, and Beast is afraid to do anything because he doesn't know what kind of impact it'll have, and so they're just kind of leaving Tony Stark in this weird catatonic state. Now, we know by virtue of what Tony Stark has done that he's basically made himself a computer projection. We know this in the Iron Man stories and in Infamous Iron Man when he basically starts talking to Dr. Doom, when Dr. Doom becomes Iron Man. We also know this in the new Iron Man stories when he appears to Riri Williams as her new AI, or at least as the AI for her new suit. And so Tony Stark really seems to be kind of shunted off to the background right now, and he may come back at some point in time, but this is basically setting the stage for Tony Stark to be removed from the position of Iron Man, for Dr. Doom to take up the traditional Iron Man role, and then Riri Williams to have Tony Stark being her AI for when she becomes the Iron Man character. But again, things just kind of wrap up relatively fast. I mean, there's not a whole lot of exposition here. There's a lot of questions that are kind of left open-ended in terms of the fact that no one knows that Captain America is still a Hydra agent. We don't really know what direction things are going to go in with She-Hulk, but it's really kind of the situation where everybody's dealing with the fallout of Civil War II in their own ways. Again, you know, Riri Williams is becoming Iron Man. She-Hulk is still pissed off that Bruce Banner's dead. Captain America is still plotting for Hydra to take over the world. Miles Morales is still trying to deal with the realization that he was almost arrested for a future possibility of him killing Captain America. It's people really just kind of coming to terms with their own place in the superhero community, knowing the possible futures that could exist for them. But the story ultimately wraps up with some enigmatic phrase about Carol Danvers saying that she has some ideas for the future, but again, we don't really know what this means. But again, this story was kind of rushed in a lot of different ways, especially when it came to the ending. It really does reflect the notion that it was a story written for the purpose of just kind of being a cash grab on the main Civil War movie that was coming out, Captain America Civil War. But if you guys are new here to Comics Explained and you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you hit the subscribe button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys like this, make sure you drop a like and yeah, leave a comment down below because I'm kind of curious. I'm sure this is going to get some very mixed reactions, but leave a comment down below and let me know what you guys thought about Civil War II. Did you love it? Did you hate it? Did you not really care? I'm kind of curious to, as to where people stand. But in any event, yeah, I will catch you all later. Peace.